mean, definitely put the time into practice and master the craft. But also networking is quite key. So you need to get out there and meet people. Like that's really how it is nowadays. More recently, I've hooked up with a poet. He's a local poet here. And he approached me to do an album for, like, do the music for his poetry.
Welcome, everybody, to the Beyond the Decks podcast, your guide to mastering the art and business of the DJing, dance, and electronic music industry. I'm your host, Robert Simos, here with learningtodj.com. And today we are speaking with an individual who is well known on the East Coast of Canada in the dance music scene. His name is DJ Jace, and he's a recording artist and co-owner of the label Fine Grind Audio. Based in Kitchener-Waterloo, Jace has been a DJ for 15 plus years, originally holding down 2 residencies in 2 of Kitchener and Waterloo's most coveted nightclubs, Revolution Nightclub, as well as Club Renaissance. He's also played at various venues across the East Coast of Canada, including Toronto's Former Government and System Sound Bar, as well as Comfort Zone, which is still around today. And he's played across North America in other different venues and internationally as well, specifically having a very important experience at the World Electronic Music Festival, which we're going to talk about. He currently runs a radio station entitled High Tech Funk on the Like That Underground syndicated radio stations every Saturday at 5 p.m. Central European Standard Time for all the finest in techno, electro, and more. His first release was The Warrior on Hard Signal Techno Recordings, a VA entitled Hard Signal 009. And in this episode, we're going to talk to Jace about his experience in being so intimate with Kitchener and Waterloo's electronic music scene and nightclub scene, as well as growing from a DJ into a recording artist and now into his own label manager. So with that, Jace, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
Amazing.
Good homework. Well done.
We try our best.
You're like Nardwar.
So Jace, usually how I like to, start these conversations is always going to kind of the roots. I feel like for every DJ, they always have some sort of experience where they find music for the first time in a way that really touches them. And, it might not be the first time they've ever heard music, but it was the first time that they really were like, oh, this is something that's really, really important to me. So where does that start for you as a DJ and a recording artist?
That's a great question. I don't remember like a definitive moment. I was like, oh, I gotta do that. Like, our music really struck me. I've always been into it. I do remember, this is going way back now, the movie Juice. Tupac Shakur was in it. And anyway, it was about a DJ. And that really took me. And that's when I got into it. And this would have been in the early 90s. Of course, I started out in hip hop, and turntablism wasn't very good with turntablism. So I just kind of messed about. I had, got the crappy old turntables, and I was into the beats too. So making beats. So getting a sampler and drum machines and things like that. Didn't really take it too seriously until I got talked into going to WEMF 1999. And that was a game changer for me. I was just blown away by the experience. Wasn't my first rave or party, but just the experience blew my mind. And I was, from then on, I went and got 1200s, took it a little more seriously. And that's really how it started for me.
So WEMF being the World Electronic Music Festival, can you talk a little bit about that? Because in the research, I didn't know that this was a festival. It went on for a couple of years, is my understanding. But what was that experience going to, I guess, what would have been a classic kind of 90s rave for you?
Just like I said, pretty mind-blowing for a guy that's used to the hip-hop scene. So it was much different. It was, more open and accepting and loving, we'll say. So it was a little culture shock for me, really, because I'm used to, the hip hop world where it's a little more edgy, we'll say. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. Just the love and the vibe in the community. So it's kind of really, really took to me for sure.
And was it just, I guess, even the music too? Did you find that was something that you hadn't been exposed to as much, or had you already been exposed to a little bit of dance, house, and techno?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a record collector, so I have friends that listen to techno through high school and in the early '90s, so I was very aware of it. I definitely had a good share of electronic vinyl, like just everything across the board. So I liked it. I listened to it. One record that really kind of helped me notice house music was the Armin van Helden's. I can't remember the name of the EP, but it's the Witch Doctor EP. I heard that on the radio, and I was like, "Oh, this blew my mind." So I was like, "I need to go get that vinyl." So that was kind of like my first like proper house record that I bought, and I believe it was '94, '95 or something like that. But yeah, again, never really got into that scene until later on after WEMF.
Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned that you had picked up your turntables. I guess you had some hip hop vinyl already. Maybe you started buying a little bit of house and techno vinyl. When did you kind of, or were you already like kind of gigging out in the city, or was that the point when you decided that, okay, I got to start trying to find gigs in places around Kitchener-Waterloo?
Well, even in high school, I would DJ house parties and things like that, just little events. So definitely, I've always been into the performance aspect of it. And then it's definitely a different world in the house world as opposed to the corporate settings. We'll say the mainstream settings. So I really need to step my game up, just with the whole beat matching and learning to play, proper riding out mixes and stuff like that. So it's a little bit different, bit of a learning curve for me. So yeah, I didn't want to rush it. So I think, like I said, it was about 1999 where I started getting into the trance and techno, playing that, but didn't really get a club gig until 2001. Me and some friends, just, opened up some, played a pool hall, a billiards hall of some sort in Waterloo. I can't remember the name. It was on Weaver Street in Waterloo. So that was kind of our first club experience. 2001-ish, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And what did you do? Did you just approach the owner and you just were like, "Hey, can we bring our 1200s and play in the pool hall?"
It was a friend of mine, Stephen Tremor. He was friends with the owner, so he had the connection there. So yeah, that's essentially it. So yeah, we just did a night, like I think 4 or 5 of us DJ, and basically just for friends mainly, and then whoever was playing pool in the hall.
Yeah. And what was that kind of early scene like in Kitchener and Waterloo? Like I mentioned, Kitchener and Waterloo used to have quite a lot of nightclubs like Revolution and I guess what became Pearl, and it was a very vibrant scene. So could you tell us a little bit about the feeling and the vibe around that time?
Well, obviously I was I'm not super old school in the KW scene. I know there's things happening in the early to mid '90s that's I'd only heard about, so I can't really speak on that. But in the mid to late '90s, when I got a little more into it, the Purple Room was another good introduction for house music. I know, and even in the Revolution, which was Pearl, they would do. I can't remember. It was a Thursday night before Easter, before Good Friday, and they always had Kenny Glasgow come in and play in the main room. So that was a proper underground experience. Again, this was before I really kind of took off with it. So, but Kenny Glasgow, a definite early influence as well. And it was very good vibes in the '90s, of course.
And when did you then go on to actually start playing at Revolution and Renaissance?
Okay, so now we're first things first. We kind of formed Fine Grind with it was me, myself, Benny Knox, and then Chuck Lee was kind of the founder of it. So he started a club night downtown Kitchener called Frequency. So that's kind of where we all banded together. That was a great opportunity for us. We brought in a number of Toronto DJs, so we made lots of connections with the Toronto DJs. And that just kind of put our name on the map a little bit. And then from there, Fresh Entertainment, I believe is their name. It's the Derek Hahn, Dennis Hahn. They were doing nights in the Proper Room after Matlock. I got to shout out Matlock and Isaac S. They were the original guys, as far as I know, anyway, in the Proper Room back in the '90s, and then moving into the 2000s, the Hans Fresh Entertainment, they took over the Proper Room, so they're responsible for getting me in there. That would be maybe 2004, 2005, somewhere around there, and I'm not even sure. I think they were working their way out, and I spoke with the owners about, being interested in taking over, essentially. So my nights seemed to be pretty good, so they let me do my thing, and it was a great run at Proper Room. So
Yeah, and so well, let's take a step back because I guess you pointed out an important landmark there, right? You started Fine Grind with a few collaborators. So can you talk about the origin there? Were you guys making music at the time? What was the sort of origin of Fine Grind in that case?
Fine Grind was created by Chuck and Benny Knox, Gizmo back in the day. We were partners. We produced together. Benny taught me a lot of production things, so I got to give him a shout out. And then we just met Chuck out and about at events, and again just joined forces with him, and we took it from there.
And so, was there like a vision at the start of what you foresaw Fine Grind kind of dealing out in terms of sound, in terms of genre, or has it always kind of been more around the techno world?
We were definitely harder edge techno, and even some like tech trance, German trance back in those days. Benny was like hard techno and Chicago techno, Jack and techno, and I was a little bit of both. I played some massive techno, and then Chuck, he was tech trance and trance mainly. So we had a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and so then you sort of all joined forces as a way to, I guess, promote your own music or your own sound.
Well, we weren't. Benny and I were producing at this point, but we weren't ready to put it out. So it was early stages. Yeah, I would say 2003, 2004. We were just messing around on Fruity Loops, essentially. So, we didn't actually start distribution, like properly start the label until about 2009. And that was mainly just Benny and I. So, and then my brother and a few other people, like Steven as well.
As an artist, how did you know how did you feel ready to go ahead and start distributing your music? You mentioned that you sort of felt like you were just messing around, you weren't ready yet. What was the path to that?
That's a good question, I guess. We would test it out in the clubs a little bit, so that helps. Gets a good reaction, and compare it to other tracks that are out there. It's another way to go, and just seemed like the next step really for us to progress and proceed.
Yeah, in developing your career, you mean?
Correct.
Yeah. So okay, so we've got Fine Grind going. We've got Jace and Benny Knox, producing in the studio, I guess, making some tracks. And then meanwhile, you're now mixing and DJing every weekend at the Purple Room at Revolution. Is that right?
At one point, yes, I was pretty much there at least bi-weekly. And then there's some times where we were there quite often, for sure. Like we definitely had owned it, I guess, for quite some time in the late, close to, anything from like 2008 up to 2014. I think I played my last gig there in 2016, Halloween, I believe, was the last gig there. So
how has I guess the tastes in Kitchener-Waterloo changed, if at all, right, compared to what you were playing at that time period?
We definitely, when we shifted to Proper Room, we were still playing pretty hard. But it got a little more clubby, I guess you could say, a little more house oriented. Because of the overflow of the main room, you'd have a little more of a mainstream crowd dipping in there. So things slowed down musically too. Like in the early 2000s, we were playing around 140, and then it dropped to in the 120, like 128 or so. So it was a popular tempo. Around, I don't even know, 2000. 2006 to 2012. The vibe changed, I guess, when EDM got really popular. Beta came to town. So it's definitely got a little more mainstream at that point. So we felt the Purple Room was, still a little more edgier and underground than them for the most part. So,
and so with you mentioned, so 140, was it playing things out like trance, or I guess more?
Yeah, trance, acid techno, hard techno. A lot of the techno even still was like hard groove was 140ish back in those days. So
yeah. And how did you manage that as, I guess, a DJ being in, I guess, what would be like a more small room, being adjacent to a larger room? Was there like dynamics or things that you learned in doing that? Or did you just sort of say, okay, this is our vibe. This is, people come to the Purple Room because they expect this particular sound?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a freewheeler when it comes to DJing, so I like to take chances and left turns, and I'm pretty open-minded to what I like. So, yeah, like you mentioned, my radio shows, techno, electro, and house. So I'm kind of all over the map. So it makes it interesting, I guess. So,
yeah,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to add on to what you're saying. I mean, I think as a DJ, it's almost hard to put yourself so much into just like one. I speaking kind of from a similar perspective. It's like I listen to a lot of techno, or I listen to a lot of drum and bass and stuff, and it's hard to pick.
Yeah, true. And then we bring in a wide variety of guests too, right? So, we'd still bring in the techno people. We brought in the Heart Signal guys, Pat and Frank, that had me out on the Heart Signal there for my first release. So we did some like hard techno nights there that were very successful. And then we did, deep house nights as well. So,
yeah. And then something that I thought was interesting was that you don't really, with a lot of new DJing, you don't see this concept of the residency as much. Can we talk about like the decline of the residency? Like what do you think happened?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, clubs kind of faded a little bit for sure, right? So, that's a good question. I mean, in for me personally, it was the clubs closed. So, that was really the downfall there. And then since those clubs have closed, it's just tried to get nights here and there. So after Pearl, we moved on to District, which is like the old Club Abstract for those who know. And then that closed as well. And then we went on to Ace Ping Pong Lounge back in Uptown. And that was kind of our last, I think we were there monthly or something like that. So it's really the last residency, I guess, I had. Now it's just kind of throwing out random parties here and there, wherever we can find a space.
Yeah. Do you think that's like a larger phenomenon throughout, North America? Or do you think that's just in some particular communities? Because even I just noticed in Toronto, like there's a lot of DJs, but you don't have, I guess, this one single DJ playing like 6 hours anymore. And maybe it's because there's so many more. True.
Yeah, it could be a factor for sure. Yeah, the Mark Oliver nights at Government would be a good example of that, right? So, yeah, that's a good question, Rob. I don't really have a definite answer for that.
Yeah, I just thought it was kind of, like going back to even we said, Mark Oliver, like I was reading an article on the government, the history of the government, and see like how the government had changed and like how he used to DJ and everything like that. And it just got me thinking, going through your history, I was like, oh, wow, it's quite fascinating that you used to have basically DJs that would play every weekend. Like they'd be there, they've lived there, right? That's the residency aspect.
Yeah.
But you don't find that as much anymore. And part of me was wondering, okay, is that maybe because there's such a large number of DJs now, or is it that maybe the clubs, like you mentioned, have been closing, or maybe there's other factors? Like I know that there's this new kind of entertainment concept of like a dinner club now.
Yeah.
So, but I just thought it was kind of interesting to just like observe that even in your history, because I do remember Revolution, and I do remember seeing like particular nights. Like I think they used to have a Euro night there at one point, right?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what the main room would have been back in the 90s, was a lot of Euro dance for sure. Another spot, speaking of Euro, would have been Lyric, which would have been before that. That's really going back into the 90s. So the Chris Shepard days and whatnot. So
Yeah.
again, a little before my time,
But you were also playing at a different club, Club Renaissance too, right?
correct. Yeah. So I was there for probably 7 years, and it was actually a gay club. So
Okay.
definitely a different experience. Yeah, it was a fun spot. They were great. The owners were great. A little more, I played a little more commercial, so a little more housey, but some more anthems and stuff like that. A little more accessible music, but yeah, nonetheless, it was. Now that was a night where I would play all night, like I would do the 4 or 5 hour set. So,
Yeah.
whereas Purple Room, I'd always bring in a guest. So,
how do you think about designing your sets when you have something like 4 or 5 hours?
well, for those Renaissance nights, I'd play deep. You know, and a lot of stuff I tested, a lot of stuff that I really liked. Some more deeper house and things like that, less commercial. And then as people start trickling and get a little more vocal action going, and then past midnight when things really start building up, then you just start dropping the bangers and have some fun, hands in the air. So it's kind of what the crowd wanted. So
you would use kind of the crowd as a way to kind of direct.
Yeah. And it was interesting there too, because your booth was in the back and you were kind of out of sight a little bit. So it wasn't like you were the center of attention, and I was fine with that. So
that's really fun, because that is something that we've talked about on this podcast before. This idea of like the changing dynamic of the performer, right? Like the DJing being front and center versus being in the back or even being on the side. So from your perspective, being in the back, for example, do you think that gave you more freedom as like an observer to pay attention to the party versus being like up in front, where you feel like you're kind of having to do this like dual role of like MC, hype man, and DJ?
For sure. It's definitely nice. A little more relaxing for sure. You don't get as many people coming up to you because they don't know where you are. So they're just on the dance floor having a good time. So
and I imagine then that the clubs and the atmosphere at that time would have been much more I guess like a club in a community, right? Like people kind of bumping into, like it was more about like a lot of times what I notice now is we go to events because of a particular name. And then I had a friend of mine, he said something really interesting, which was that like a lot of shows, even the design, right, is like meant to kind of point you towards the DJ. And it's helpful because it's like this central orienting point. But prior to that, the idea of the DJ becoming a performer and like on the center of the stage, you wouldn't have had that. So people's attention would have been directed everywhere, I imagine.
Correct. Yeah. Anywhere really. Right. So
how do you think, what do you think we've gained and lost with that change from like even a dance floor experience perspective as well as a DJing perspective?
I mean, I'm a little bit torn because I kind of like watching the DJ perform myself.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the DJ culture has gotten pretty big, and the superstar DJs have really driven up the prices and everything. So it's really hard. It's not as affordable as it used to be, really, right? So there's that drawback for sure. So there's some DJs I'd like to see, but just you look at the ticket prices and you're like, wow, it's crazy. So
yeah, I remember. Depending on like where you're going, like I think for Ibiza, for example, like some of the headliners are like 50. I don't know what it is now, but it would be like 75 euros or something like that for which I guess in dollars would be like, I don't know, like 80, maybe like 95. So it's, I guess, that accessibility. Whereas like back then, cover would have been like $5 or something.
For sure, yeah.
So moving then along, right? So this is around, I guess, 2009. Fine Grind is kind of taken to the point where you're starting to do distribution and you're DJing regularly out now in Kitchener-Waterloo. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And so at that point in your development, were you just actively focusing on making music and just getting additional gigs and bookings, or what were you doing?
Well, I still had, at this point, I've had a son. he was born in 2007, so that was a game changer too. Kind of need to change my priorities a little bit, for sure. So the dreams of being a touring DJ around the world were kind of like, probably not going to happen now, like extensively anyway. And that was fine. But I still had a full-time job outside of music. So yeah, it was definitely a lot going on with everything. So it'd be hard to get the time to work on music so much if you're gigging like every weekend. So your ears are tired and you're out late. So little, you don't want to get up right away and work on beats once you're after a late night, and then you potentially have to gig again that night. So getting the production in was tricky at times, for sure.
Yeah. It can become almost all consuming, especially, and I know that, like, for example, you're a personal trainer as well, so you have this whole other like wellness aspect, right? Where
correct.
How do you practically manage that as somebody, I guess, who's been through the ringer? Do you have any strategies or habits that you've developed?
You mean like for personally or for career, or?
Personally and career, for managing that, right? For example, if you're out till like 3 a.m., how is it that were you doing things like not drinking in order to make sure that you could, stay up or get up in the morning? Things like that.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it definitely changed, like I said, the priorities. So I need to be sharp for clients bright and early Monday morning. So there's no, not really an option. I've taken a lot less gigs since COVID, just because the personal training's been very busy. So I need to be sharp for that. So yeah, to grind out DJ gigs every weekend, probably not optimal for me. So yeah, I've turned down a lot of gigs in the last few years. So,
and it's just a kind of balancing, because I've talked to a lot of DJs, and it's the common theme that I notice is there's like a multi kind of stream of like how people are managing their music and their DJing. Like it might be like 33% of their time or 50% of their time, but it's not as much 100% of the time. I notice either people are teaching or they have some sort of main job or something like that, and then they're doing this on the side. What kind of advice would you have for people who are new DJs who I feel like can kind of become almost all consumed with this, like wanting to succeed in this world, and sort of lacking that balance?
I mean, definitely put the time into practice and master the craft. But also networking is quite key. So you need to get out there and meet people. Like that's really how it is nowadays. Like virtually all my gigs come from, just people that know me, right? So get your name out there, get your mixes out there. Any type of videos are great. Videos are probably better nowadays. People like to see you in action. So I would go for that. And I think that's it. I think for the balance wise, try to keep that balance. Be healthy when you can. Take time to decompress. Get some sleep. Sleep's become much more important for me nowadays. It's a little bit older now, so the recovery is a little bit rougher, we'll say.
Yeah.
When come Monday, come Tuesday. So it can be tricky.
Now, what were you doing when it came to networking? Were these opportunities mostly coming out of your own adventures into, the nightclub scene for yourself, or did you go out with intent?
Yeah, I mean, any residency, I just inquired. I mean, that's, email people, like reach out to people, you just got to take that initiative, right? And then, from booking DJs, they would return the favor. So I book them, they book me. So we've had a couple of good adventures just with gig trades. So that's another opportunity. If you know people from other cities or other provinces or states, it's a good way to do it. So
yeah, I think the idea of reciprocity, right, in kind of the music industry, and just even the gig, like I think of some of the gigs that I've played, for example, and it's like either you threw your own party and you invited your friend to play, and then he threw a party, then he invited you to play, and it's kind of this circle of like trading, I guess is what you mentioned.
Yeah, yep. For sure.
But also even I found meeting people out in the the nightlife, and just you run into somebody, and it's a little bit trickier now, I find, because there is a lot of DJs, right? And so it's you don't want to, I guess, go and bother the DJ mid-set and be like, hey.
Yeah. And sometimes it's even better to get in touch with the promoter or the club owner. I find the promoters would be the people to contact. If it's the DJ is also the promoter, that's a different story, I guess. But it's sometimes it can be tricky because there's that expectation of a gig trade, right? So people will book me, and then it's like, okay, I want to return the favor, but at the same time, it's like, I'm not sure if your sound really works for my nights, really. So that's a bit tricky too. So can lead to problems as well. So just get out there, meet people, and network.
And how do you position yourself to these promoters, or how did you position yourself to these promoters? Was it on a kind of a basis of like, look, now I feel it's a little different. You could say, okay, look, here's my following. I have this many people on my email list, or I have this and that. What was some of the things that you were positioning yourself with back then?
Usually it'd be emails for the most part. If it was local, hand out CDs, mixed CDs. So, but mainly emails for out of town or out of province clubs or events.
Yeah. And so you would just reach out and be like, hey, interested in playing at this place, or would love to do a gig, or do you want to come play at my gig sometime?
Yeah, it's like if I know I'm going to Europe, I'll start reaching out to various promoters over there and try to make it happen that way. So a lot of cold calling, so it's a lot of failure along the way for sure, but sometimes you get hits. So
did you have any ways that you kind of maintain resiliency in the face of that?
I'm pretty stubborn, I guess. So, just what else am I going to do, right? So just do music. I love it, and if I can turn it into some trips as well, why not? So
yeah. So moving then along, okay, so you've been DJing, you've had your son, you changed a little bit of priorities, maybe pull back a little bit on the DJing. Was that when, I guess, production ramped up a little bit more because you weren't out as much, you didn't have as much of that recovery, or?
Yeah, so there's definitely a stint where me and Benny would collab a lot. So we were all right. And back in the day, like when we started, we had a bigger artists. Like we would get lots of demos. We had a lot of artists on the roster, so we didn't put out as much, just us. It's changed a little bit, and we've kind of tightened things up. So not as many artists on the roster at the moment, but that's fine. Just managing artists is a big time too, right? So kind of get to the point where it's like, okay, I just want to be creative. I just want to work on music. That's why I took the radio show too, because it would keep me motivated to DJ every week. So now that I'm not doing the club gigs, it's nice. I come down, record my show every week. I do have some guests, of course, but I just keeps me in the loop a little bit, and it's a good opportunity to get our songs out there. And I'm going to say that's a good opportunity too to meet people. Plugging other artists, playing their stuff. It's a good opportunity as well. Made a lot of good contacts just by playing other people's music. They see that good opportunities can come from that as well. So, you end up making friends, and then, they start sending you music. So that's a good thing as well. But getting back to sorry, I went off a little bit there. Getting back to the production, it was really, we stayed pretty steady with producing. When the gigs stopped a little bit, like COVID, for example, I got so much done during COVID. So there's a lot of I did an album in 2020, and that probably wouldn't have been able to happen in the span of a year, on a regular schedule, right? So lots of free time during COVID. That was a big one. That definitely changed the production. So I just had loads of music to put out after that. So.
Mm-hmm. And when it came to that kind of, I guess, what would have been an A&R type of experience, right? With Fine Grind, you mentioned you were signing a bunch of these artists. How was it just through demos that you were discovering these artists? Was it the connections?
Yeah, connections mainly. We would, well, for example, I'll give a couple examples. A name you might know, Amber Long. I don't even know how I discovered her. Just found her music somehow, and I reached out to her and signed her. I put out a bunch of music with her, and she had a bunch of people as well. So she would, infiltrate all her people into our label too. So that was big. And then same thing. Another name you might know, Tyler Hill. Him and I connected around 2019, I believe, and he kind of got on board with us. And again, he had all his people starting to give us music as well. So that was mainly the big drivers of when we'd have big release years.
Mm-hmm.
And having more people come in. So.
And you kind of, I guess, getting into those networks, as you mentioned, those like artist networks, like Amber's network or Tyler's network, and you just have, essentially them, I guess, promoting your label, right? And then those artists then becoming interested in Fine Grind.
Correct.
And then I guess Fine Grind would have been digital from the start then, or
correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious how, I guess, that experience, because I feel like a lot of labels have probably undergone a transition from like the pressing the vinyl to a digital world, but you started purely on digital. So
yep.
how I suppose did you get started? Like if there's a DJ listening to this and they're like, I want to start a label, I have music, what was it that you, I guess, practically did to go set up that kind of distribution?
Initially, it's different now because you can self-release. But back in those days, you pretty much needed to have like a plan for a distributor. So you need to have at least 4 releases ready. So then they knew your schedule for like the next 6 to 12 months, sort of. So they wanted to have stuff good to go, and they knew you were ready. So it was tricky initially to get a distributor when you have nothing. So we kind of had to build up, get those 3 or 4 releases good to go, and then sign. Get on with the distribution at that point. So that's, again, if you want to go for a proper distributor, that's probably the way you need to go. If you just want to self-release on, say, Bandcamp, you don't need to go that route. So it's a little easier. There's other distributors too that make that happen for you. I think like DistroKid and TuneCore are examples where it's a lot easier just to get your music out there. So.
Yeah, it's even the self-released, like the toolkit of self-releasing has expanded so much. Like I've put stuff, I used CD Baby, for example, for a couple of million. But what's I guess unique about the tracks is that they're kind of different, right? So if you release through CD Baby, it won't necessarily help you get into things like Beatport or TrackSource or anything like that. You have to go through alternative distributors, like, for example, like Labelworks, Proton, or a few of these other ones, I think.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
And so, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, we actually kind of have 3 labels on the go. There's the original Fine Grind, which we signed with a German distributor, and we didn't love the deal. So we wanted to switch to Proton, actually, as you know. I can't remember when that was, maybe around before COVID. So late teens, maybe 2016, 2017, 2018, somewhere around there. We switched to Proton, and it was a little easier to make that switch. Unfortunately, we couldn't bring our catalog over, but we couldn't even really use the name either. So that's when we switched to FGA as well. So that's kind of label number 2. So FGA is label number 2. And then I've recently kind of started another sub label where it's just more of my experimental music. So it's I kind of just take out the vowels. So it's like FNGRND. So it's like still Fine Grind, but like broken down. And that's more ambient and experimental music that I'm doing essentially on my own. So
yeah, well, you just put out a few releases recently. I was listening to them, actually. They were like, the ambient stuff is quite nice. I'd love to. Correct. Can we go a little deeper into that? Like, where was the inspiration, desire? Where did that come from a guy who's really all about the techno?
So yeah, kind of being in the wellness world.
Hmm.
My girlfriend, she's involved in wellness as well. So she's a qigong instructor.
Hmm.
So I've been to a few yoga classes too, where they've incorporated the music. So I've really enjoyed that. So I was like, it's kind of useful, functional music.
Hmm.
It's stressful times. It's again, I find it useful, and there's a market for it. I find, and it's just something I've liked. As I've gotten older, I've gotten a little more into the deeper sounds too. So I like the ambient in my album from 2020. I've got a few ambient songs touched on it there. Sometimes if I make like a deep house or techno song and I like the elements, I will do an ambient version of that, basically just an ambient edit. So it's something I've shouldn't say always have done, but it's throughout time. It's I've done that for sure. And more recently, I've hooked up with a poet. He's a local poet here, and he approached me to do an album for like do the music for his poetry. Plug him, R.K. Gandhi. His book Red Pill Rhymes. A little plug there for him. Yeah, his book did pretty good, and then he wanted, basically pick poetry out of that from the book, and then put it to music. So that's the last, I guess, would have been much of this year early on. That's kind of been my project, has been working on this album with him. So kind of slowed down on the club music and just doing ambient kind of down tempos, even cinematic type stuff. So that's been a major artistic change for sure this year. So um,
How have how's the design process changed, right? Because I feel like maybe it's like the hammer. What's that quote? It's like for a carpenter, everything looks like a nail or something. If you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I think like the analogy you would draw to DJing is like if you're only used to that four on the floor kick drum, like myself, for example, right? Your natural like reaction almost to any, I think, for example, I hear like a gospel sample or something like that or this and that, and I think, oh, put that on a four kick bar and put some hats and put some claps and let's turn that into a track.
yeah,
How does that work for the ambient stuff though?
it's funny you mentioned that because I have that same thought process when I'm making music, because like I do a little bit of everything, right? So it's like if
Mhm.
I'm taking samples or just listening to stuff or playing things, it's always like, okay, I like that sound. I like that melody. What would that be like? What would that work as? Like what genre? So I basically just I'll go on a mission, and like just if I'm like, some of it's accidents for sure, but a lot of the time it's like I'll go, Kevin. My mind is like, let's do some ambient stuff. So let's just go collect as many sounds as I can, whether it's from sampling or playing some things. And then yeah, collecting it, and then just kind of it's a bit messy, to be honest, the way I do it. I just have all these sounds, and I kind of pick and choose which ones go together, and then that's how it goes. And then you'll find some things like, oh, that sounds actually that'd be a nice house record sound. So um, some of it's accidental, but some of there's definitely some thought to like what I'm going to shoot for. So ambient, definitely different vibes. Uh, a lot more pads and things like that, longer sounds, more drawn out. When I make my house in techno, I'm very I like lots of changes in it. So not really ideal in ambient stuff. You really want it to just be smooth and almost more flowing, right? You don't want those harsh changes, because it goes against the purpose of ambient, right? So you want people to chill out and just almost like that. I don't want to say it's background noise, but
Yeah.
it certainly can be. So
Yeah, even the way that you're framing that is kind of interesting, right? Thinking about, I mean, because dance music is, for the most parts, looped repetitive, right? And so actually the main points of intrigue are the transitions, right? Whether it's
correct.
whatever, an 8-bar loop, and then you have some weird symbol or something, and then that kind
Yeah.
of re-engages the mind, versus ambient is like the full flow and experience is the entire track. You're not waiting for that stimulus again.
True. Yeah.
And so are you taking, I guess, is this the first time you've ever worked with, not what would be a vocalist, but I guess a different kind of modality with the music?
Um,
Being
Not
the
really.
poetry.
Like, in the poetry, yeah. I mean, I've worked with vocalists before.
Yeah.
In the 2020 album that I put out, I actually have a few hip hop songs. That was fun. It was went pretty well. I would just make beats, send it to them. They'd send it back, and I'd mix it after and send it off. And I thought it turned out pretty good. I enjoyed that whole process as well. So, um, admittedly, my studio's not really set up for a vocalist to come over and sing. So I kind of I like that trade off, sending them music to inspire them. Um, it was a little bit different with Ravi there, the poet. He sent me all his vocals
Mm.
um, before I even really sent him music. So I would try to capture his vibe, just what he would be talking about. Something would be a little more ominous, some would be a little more uplifting and inspiring. So that would be how I would, make my music for him. So he didn't love everything, but for the most part, it was pretty good. He liked a lot of it. So I think we did a good job with it.
Yeah. And even the fact that this is a possibility, right? It kind of just shows you how being a DJ can open you up to so many different opportunities. Like I just think, for example, like you would be DJing, let's say, and then you could start doing a music stream. You could start a radio station, kind of like what you've done. And now you're sort of almost opening up to this other world of possibility where you're producing music that you wouldn't necessarily play out at the nightclub.
For sure.
Right? So what then does the future of Jace and Fine Grind look like? You've mentioned that you've got this album coming up. Do we know when it's going to be released potentially?
We're gonna do a physical release first. I think he wants to do so. He's got USB sticks to put out. So with the current mail situation, there's a mail strike going on, I guess. So it's the manufacturing factor there might be a little bit delayed. It's going to be early New Year. We were hoping to have it out by the end of this year, but some delays with that because like I said, we'll do the physical first and then the digital. So that'll be early New Year, and then also I'm going to do a full ambient album. Again, as you mentioned, I put out a few songs. I'm going to put them as a big collection and then some other unreleased stuff as well. Again, that'll be early in the new year. And then we have another artist, Jesney. He's a partner in the label now. He does all the work. He's from London. He does all the artistic work, all the design, along with Benny, who's still on the team. But anyway, Jesney, he's got an album dropping as well, a little more abstract, a little bit of everything. I haven't heard it yet, but he's pretty excited about it. So not just doing club music for sure. We have lots of club music coming out early in the new year. Tyler Hill has a release coming out for us early on as well. But yeah, so it's a little bit of everything, and I like the album aspect too. So it's nice to create a vibe with an album. So as opposed to just putting out 2 or 4 track EPs, which are nice, which is kind of good for house or techno. So
do you approach creating an album with a particular philosophy? Like I think of, and I don't know if this is actually how like rock stars and stuff would have thought about their albums, but some people think about an album as a way to tell a story or a narrative or compose a sort of experience. Do you approach your albums in this kind of way? Do you have any rituals or systems that you use?
Well, again, I've only completed one full one at this point. So the process for that was, I called it music for your mind, body, and soul. So it was a little bit of, again, I think there's only 1 techno song on that album, and then 2 electro songs. And then it was, like I said, I think 3 or 4 hip hop songs and the rest ambient. We tried to shoot for positive vibes in everything. There's some ominous vibes as well. Again, it's 2020, so COVID times, some ominous vibes, uncertainty, right? But trying to inspire some positivity as well. So yeah, the album kind of, I feel like it has a little bit of a story. I tried to, when I did the track selection of it, I tried to, have a good connection from song to song. So which can be tricky when you have multiple genres on the go. So
yeah, but even the fact that you've had kind of an epicenter of an organizing idea, right? Mind, body, and soul. Like I think about that sometimes from a creative project perspective. And sometimes it's not clear. You might have like an idea for a track and you're trying to, I don't know, do something with this creative idea, but it doesn't, you sort of only are able to like come up with the rhetoric and explanation after the fact. Like you're like, oh, I don't know why I made this track the way I did, but here's like my kind of projected explanation of why why I did that. But I guess with the mind, body, and soul, was that something that was driving the project, or did that come after everything was completed? And you're like, oh, interesting.
I'm trying to think back to how that went down. Yeah, I definitely wanted to have that vibe, a little bit of, everything. So the ambient stuff was on the album was a little more, thought-provoking, hopefully just thought-provoking and inspiring. And then the hip hop that we did was positive, I think, and inspiring. And then the techno and electro was definitely a little more edgy and darker. So I can't remember if that I set out for that whole concept of mind, body, soul, or if just like I definitely would have at the end when it was all complete, for sure. Like this is when I select all the tracks to be on the album. So
yeah, it's kind of like I've made all this stuff, and then you're like, oh, like okay, all the red goes here, and then all the blue goes here, and then all the green goes here, and you're like, oh, look, this is sort of like a completed story here, which is kind of wild how that happens. It's like it's unconscious, right?
For sure. Yeah.
So coming to I guess almost the end here, Jace. I want to ask, what is the future of Jace looking like? Is it you've got a couple of these tracks coming out, you've got a few tracks coming out with Fine Grind in the next upcoming year, but is there any bigger ambitious things that you'd want to share that you're working on or thinking about?
Yeah, just making that shift to a little more, I guess you could say, I feel like when you make house and techno club music, you're more so making music for DJs. Nowadays in the streaming world, it's they don't even really like you sending them like a 6 or 7 minute house or techno song, right, to Spotify, for example, right? So that's another reason I kind of want to make music for just other areas, like for the fans, really, like people that love that music. So not just for the clubs, but a little bit of everything. Just I don't know, inspire people. Again, trying to keep those positive vibes, but then also, times are tough too. So for some folks, so inspire them, but then also, it's all about moods, really, right? So I mean, depending on my mood is going to determine how or what kind of music or vibe I'm going to create, or at least hope to create. As far as we're just going to keep putting out the club music for sure. And then, just quite focused on, just getting out as much music as I can. Hopefully it's the goal. Got lots to say, lots of thoughts, but just trying to, put it together. So thoughts and ideas. Yeah. You know how it is, right? So the very abstract palette I've got going on. So just to put it together in an organized fashion is the goal, I guess. But just get some more, keep up with the DJing. I still enjoy the performing, but keep that going for sure. Have some adventures along the way with that. So it's again, meeting people, met so many amazing people through music, and whether it's local or travel. So it's a blessing, really. So keep that going. Why not, right? So
you really do meet a lot of I always find the music festival scene is quite serendipitous in terms of like where and how you meet random people, and then how those people then meet you later in life at some point for some reason.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Well, Jace, for the last segment here, I prepped you with this. I hope we want 3 tracks in the following categories. The first is Under the Radar. It's a track that you feel hasn't really gotten the airtime or play that you think it deserves. The second is On Repeat. It's a track that you've got on repeat over and over and over again. Any of these can be on any genre you want. And the last is your guilty pleasure. So it's something that maybe is a little bit left field from what you're typically playing out. Could be hip hop, could be anything, but that's what we're looking for from you.
Okay, guilty pleasure. Definitely the grimy hip hop for sure.
I was thinking that.
yeah. I'm not gonna lie. I like those 808s, man. I can't that trap 808, man. It's feel that it's good. The lyrics are can be a little sketchy at times for sure, but no, that would definitely be my guilty pleasure music, I would say. On repeat, that's a particular song. The song I'm working on, the loop, just loops for hours, right? But no, other than that, well, I can't really say a certain song, but in our house, my son, he's really into classical music, so we have Beethoven going pretty much 24 hours a day. Our Beethoven playlists are going, so it's Beethoven on repeat. I'm trying to think, and then under the radar track. That's a good question. Let me think about that one. I feel like biased, of course, but I feel like our label has put out some good music, and then we just don't have the the big marketing budget, or to get it out there. I definitely think Benny Knox's stuff is definitely worthy under slept on music for sure. With that being said, I'll plug him a little bit. He's got his is it out now? I can't even remember. I think it's maybe out in early December. Bad plug, but yeah, Benny Knox, Immense Power. I think it's out for pre-order somewhere. So he's a slept on guy that puts out really good music. So I've been playing the track. So Immense Power. It's a good one. So
yeah. Well, he just came back from I saw he came back from retirement or something like that to play a show.
Yeah. He's been semi-retired, I guess. So but yeah, it's good to have him back. We played a few times this year. So again, big influence on me. So since the start. So happy to have him still doing his thing with us. So
amazing. Well, we'll put all of those into the show notes then. All right, Jace. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today to sit down with us and tell us about your experience, about your origins, fine grind, as well as some interesting adventures into alternative avenues that some DJs and producers who might listen to this might not think about, right? Like ambient, wellness music. Is there anything else you want to share with the audience, just before we reach the end of the podcast?
Go support your local scenes, I guess. Your local scene needs it. It really starts locally. So clubs are really hurting out there nowadays. So don't forget about your local talent, and just support the music when you can. Keep it alive, really, right? So
yeah. That's making sure that because that's also where you'll find those organic connections, right? You never know where something might go.
for sure, absolutely.
Wicked. Well, Jace, thank you again so much for taking the time today, and we'll have to catch up once again soon. And be sure to check out Jace's album coming out in the new year, and check out some of Fine Grind audios. I'll put all of those notes into the show notes. For now, this has been Robert with learningtodj.com, and we'll catch you next time on Beyond the Decks. All right, Jace, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob.